You know that moment when you're sitting at your kitchen table? Maybe it's a Sunday morning, coffee's getting cold, and you just open your banking app? Not because you need to, just because some weird part of your brain won't let you relax until you've looked. And for a second, the number stares back at you, and you feel this strange mix of emotions. Not panic exactly, not contentment either. Just this quiet, unsettling feeling like you should be further along by now. Maybe you're in your 30s. Maybe you're doing fine by most definitions. You have a job, you pay your bills, you're not drowning. But there's this nagging sense that you're somehow behind. Like everyone else got a memo you didn't receive. Like there's a version of your life where the money stuff just makes sense. Where you're not just surviving months, but actually building something. That feeling, I know it intimately. My name is Sam, and I honestly spend an embarrassing amount of time thinking about money. Not just the numbers, but the psychology of it, the weird emotional weight it carries, the reasons some people seem to figure it out in their 30s, while others stay stuck in the same exhausting patterns for another decade. I've read the books, I've made the mistakes, I've had the late night conversations with friends where we all pretend we have it figured out and then go home and quietly panic. And over time, I've started to notice things, patterns, blind spots, mental traps that nobody really sits you down and explains. The stuff that isn't in the generic spend less than you earn advice that sure is technically correct, but also kind of misses the entire point of what makes wealth building actually hard. So today I want to have a real conversation. Not a lecture, not a listicle, just an honest, slightly rambling walk through the things I wish someone had told me, and probably told you too, about what building wealth in your 30s actually looks like. Because I think most of us are fighting the wrong battles, chasing the wrong goals, and comparing ourselves to the wrong benchmarks. And once you see it, you genuinely can't unsee it. Let's get into it. The comparison trap is eating you alive. Okay, so let's start with the thing nobody wants to admit is a problem because admitting it feels embarrassing. Social comparison. And I don't just mean the obvious Instagram version where someone posts a photo on a yacht and you feel bad about your apartment. It's subtler than that in your 30s. It's your colleague who just bought a house. It's the friend from college who seems to be killing it at some startup. It's your cousin who's apparently investing in real estate now. When did that happen? Here's the thing about your 30s specifically. It's the decade where people's financial lives start to visibly diverge. In your 20s, most people are kind of equally broke, equally figuring it out. There's a certain solidarity in the chaos, but in your 30s, the gap starts to show. Some people are compounding the good decisions they made early, others are compounding the bad ones. And when you look around and see the divergence happening in real time, it creates this almost unbearable psychological pressure to sprint. And sprinting leads to terrible decisions. Seriously, some of the worst financial choices I've ever witnessed, either made to myself honestly, came from a desperate attempt to catch up. Putting money in things you don't understand because someone else seemed to be getting rich from it. Buying a house before you were ready because everyone around you was buying houses. Taking on risk that didn't match your actual situation because staying patient felt like falling behind. The research on this is actually fascinating. There's a concept in behavioral economics called relative deprivation. Basically, your sense of financial well-being isn't determined by your absolute situation. It's determined by how you see yourself relative to your reference group. So you can be objectively doing well and still feel financially stressed purely because the people around you appear to be doing better. Your brain literally cannot distinguish between I'm not doing well and I'm doing well but someone nearby is doing better. It registers both as a threat. The actionable piece here, yeah, and I know this sounds almost aggressively simple, is to deliberately redefine your reference group. Instead of comparing yourself to peers in terms of net worth or possessions, compare yourself to your past self. Are you making more deliberate decisions than you were 2 years ago? Are you saving more, even a little? Have you eliminated one financial habit that was quietly draining you? That's the comparison that actually moves you forward. Everything else is just noise wearing the costume of motivation. The income ceiling. You don't know, you've accepted. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you seriously not casually, not as a vague wish, but seriously thought about how to earn more money? Most personal finance advice is obsessed with the spending side. Cut the subscriptions. Make your coffee at home. Skip the avocado toast. God, if I hear that one more time. And look, controlling your spending matters. It really does. But in your 30s, if your income isn't growing, you're essentially trying to fill a bathtub faster by switching to a smaller bucket rather than opening the tap wider. There's a psychological ceiling that most people build for themselves around income, and it's almost invisible until you look for it. It sounds like, I'm not really a negotiator. People in my field just don't earn that much. I'd need years of extra experience to justify asking for more. My company doesn't really do big raises. These feel like observations. They're actually decisions. I want to share something a friend of mine told me years ago that genuinely rewired how I thought about this. She was a graphic designer, mid-level, comfortable, but not thriving. She'd never negotiated a salary in her life, not once. She thought negotiating was something aggressive people did, and she wasn't aggressive. Then one year, kind of on a dare to herself, she did some research, figured out market rates, and asked for a 22% raise during her annual review. Just asked calmly with data. Her manager paused, said he'd have to talk to HR, and came back 3 days later with 18%. She almost fainted. That one conversation, maybe 15 uncomfortable minutes, earned her an extra amount per year that compounding over the next decade would turn into something genuinely life-changing. And she'd almost not done it because she'd decided, without evidence, that it wasn't possible for someone like her. The income ceiling is usually self-constructed. That doesn't mean breaking through it is easy. There are real structural barriers, real industries with genuine constraints, real systemic inequities that affect people differently. I'm not pretending any of that doesn't exist, but there's almost always some room in most situations to push. A side project, a certification that unlocks a new pay band, a lateral move to a company that values your skills more. Freelancing on the side. The lever exists. Most people just don't pull it because they have quietly accepted the ceiling as a wall. Why saving feels pointless, and why that feeling is lying to you. Here's a feeling I think is wildly under-talked about in personal finance circles. The feeling that the amounts you can currently save are so small that they basically don't matter. Like, you crunch the numbers, you realize you can save maybe a couple $100s a month, and some part of your brain goes, okay, but that's nothing. That's not going to get me anywhere meaningful. Why bother? And honestly, in the short term, that feeling isn't entirely irrational. A few $100s sitting in a savings account isn't going to change your life next year. The psychological problem is that your brain is evaluating the impact of saving using a linear mental model, but wealth actually builds exponentially. And humans are famously terrible at intuitively understanding exponential growth. Let me give you a concrete example, because abstract math doesn't stick, but stories do. Imagine two people, Let's call them Maya and Jordan. Maya starts saving and investing at 32. She puts away $400 a month into an index fund that earns an average annual return of 8%. She does this consistently for 30 years until she's 62. Jordan, meanwhile, waits. He tells himself he'll start when he earns more, when things settle down, when the timing feels right. He starts at 42, just 10 years later, putting in the exact same $400 a month at the same return. But he goes until 62 as well, so he invests for 20 years instead of 30. Maya ends up with roughly $590,000. Jordan ends up with roughly $235,000. Same monthly contribution, same return. The only difference is 10 years. Those 10 years, which felt inconsequential, which felt like I'll deal with it later, cost Jordan more than $350,000 in future wealth. That's not a scare tactic. That's just the math of compounding doing what it does. Time isn't just a factor in wealth building, it's the factor. And the smaller the amounts feel right now, the more important it is to start anyway, because you're not just growing the money, you're buying time in the market. Every month you wait is a month of compounding you never get back. The actionable thing here is automation. I know it sounds boring. It is boring. That's also why it works. Set up an automatic transfer to an investment account on payday before you ever see the money. Even if it's small, especially if it's small, because small and consistent beats large and sporadic every single time, and automation removes the willpower equation entirely. The hidden cost of financial avoidance. All right, this one is a little uncomfortable, and I'm going to ask you to stay with me on it. There's a behavior pattern that I see constantly. Honestly, I've done it myself, called financial avoidance. It's when the anxiety around money becomes so uncomfortable that you just stop looking. You don't open the statements. You vaguely know your card is kind of high, but you don't check the actual number. You meant to set up a budget, but the process felt overwhelming. So you told yourself you'd do it on the weekend, and then the weekend came and went, and somehow 6 months passed. Financial avoidance is not laziness. I want to be really clear about that because a lot of people carry tremendous shame about it, and shame never actually fixes anything. Avoidance is a completely normal psychological response to anxiety. When something feels threatening and uncontrollable, the brain's default is often to not look at it, because not looking at it makes the threat feel more manageable in the short term. The brutal irony is that financial avoidance is enormously expensive. The fees that quietly compound, the high-interest debt that grows unnoticed, the opportunities that pass because you weren't paying attention, the insurance you forgot to update, the subscription that's been charging you for something you haven't used in 2 years. Avoidance doesn't make the financial reality go away. It just lets it deteriorate in the dark. What I've found helpful, and this is genuinely something that took me embarrassingly long to figure out, is to create very low-stakes, regular financial check-ins. Not a full audit. Not a confrontation. Just a weekly 15-minute slot where you look at the numbers in a calm setting, maybe with something you enjoy nearby, and you just observe. You don't have to fix everything at once. You don't have to solve the whole picture in one sitting. You just have to look. Familiarity reduces anxiety over time. The numbers stop being monsters when you see them regularly. It's like that thing where if you avoid calling someone back for long enough, the call becomes this enormous psychological weight. But if you just called when it was fresh, it would have been a 5-minute conversation. Most financial situations are the same. They're more manageable than the avoidance makes them feel. The myth of the perfect financial plan. Can I share something that took me a weirdly long time to understand? There is no perfect financial plan. There is no ideal moment to start. There is no version of your financial life where every decision is optimal and every variable is under control and the plan unfolds exactly as projected. I think a lot of people, especially analytical, thoughtful people, get stuck in a kind of planning paralysis. They spend months researching the best investment account, the optimal asset allocation, the ideal emergency fund size, the best budgeting method, the perfect sequence for paying off debt versus investing. And while they're researching, they're not doing anything, because doing something imperfect feels worse than doing nothing while theoretically pursuing perfection. The truth is that a decent plan executed consistently and adjusted along the way will almost always outperform a perfect plan that never gets started. Your financial life doesn't need to be a masterpiece on day one. It needs to be a living document, something you build, refine, break sometimes, and fix. Think about it like learning to cook. Nobody makes a perfect meal the first time or the 10th time. But people who cook imperfectly, consistently, who try things and fail and adjust and try again, they get good. They develop instincts. They build a relationship with the kitchen. Meanwhile, the person who reads every cookbook and watches every tutorial, but never actually cooks anything, they stay exactly where they were. Your 30s are not too late to start. I want to say that again because I think it needs to land properly. Your 30s are not too late. The internet is full of, I built $1 million portfolio by 25, content that makes everyone else feel like they've already lost. That content is real, but it's not representative. And using it as your baseline is like measuring your fitness against Olympic athletes. It distorts reality in a way that's actively harmful. You have time. Probably more than you think. The important thing is that you stop waiting for the conditions to be perfect and start building the habit of doing something. What lifestyle creep is really doing to your wealth? Here's a quiet villain in the wealth story that almost nobody talks about candidly. Lifestyle creep. You get a raise, genuinely exciting, you worked for it, and within 6 months your expenses have somehow risen to absorb the entire raise. No deliberate decision was made. It just happened. The slightly nicer apartment because you could afford it now, the car upgrade, the restaurants that became your new baseline, the subscriptions that felt reasonable at your new income level. Lifestyle creep isn't a moral failing. It's not a character flaw. It's the natural result of living in a world that's extremely good at presenting you with things to spend money on at exactly the moment you have a little more capacity to spend it. Retailers, advertisers, real estate agents, car dealers, they all know when you've gotten a raise before you've had time to think about what to do with it. The antidote isn't to never enjoy anything. I want to be clear about that because some personal finance advice is basically just saying suffer now so you can enjoy later. And I think that's a miserable and often ineffective way to live. The antidote is intentionality. When your income grows, pause before your lifestyle grows with it. Ask yourself deliberately, out loud if you have to, what percentage of this increase do I want to allocate to investing and savings? And what percentage do I want to allocate to improving my quality of life? Even a split of 50-50 is transformative compared to letting the whole thing disappear into an expanded lifestyle without a conscious decision. Some financial advisors call this paying your future self first. I think of it more as just actually deciding, not letting the environment make the decision for you by default. The relationship between wealth and identity. This one goes a little deeper, so stay with me. There's something that almost never gets discussed in personal finance content, and it's this. Your financial behavior is deeply connected to your identity. How you think of yourself, what story you tell about who you are and where you come from. These things shape your financial decisions in ways that feel like pure logic but are actually pure psychology. If you grew up in a household where money was always tight, you might have absorbed the belief, not consciously but deeply, that financial struggle is just the baseline, that it's normal, that it's maybe even somewhat noble to be scrappy and just getting by. And that belief, if it sits unexamined, can cause you to unconsciously self sabotage exactly when things start to improve. Because abundance doesn't match your self concept, and so you find ways, subtle, almost invisible ways, to return to the familiar pattern of scarcity. Alternatively, if you grew up in an environment where wealth was associated with a kind of person you don't want to be, selfish, materialistic, disconnected from community, you might carry an unconscious resistance to accumulating wealth, even when you would consciously want to. The idea of being wealthy might feel somewhere deep down, like a threat to your values or your identity. Neither of these is a permanent sentence, but you can't change a belief you're not aware of. The work here is genuinely reflective, and I don't mean in a vague journal about your feelings way, though that can help. I mean sitting honestly with questions like, what did I learn about money growing up? What did wealthy people represent to me? What does being good with money say about a person? What would it mean about me if I became financially secure? The answers can be surprising, and sometimes they explain patterns that felt completely irrational from the outside. The investment knowledge gap. Nobody fills in. Let's talk about investing for a second, because there's something I genuinely find frustrating about how this topic is typically presented to people. It's either too simple, just buy index funds, or it's so complex it requires a finance degree to parse. And most people end up in the gap between those two extremes, vaguely knowing they should be investing, but not quite confident enough to actually do it. The thing is, for the average person building wealth in their 30s, the basics of investing don't have to be complicated, but they do have to be understood. Because just buy index funds without understanding why index funds work, what they actually are, how to think about risk, or how to handle the inevitable market downturn. That's a recipe for making emotional decisions at exactly the wrong time. Here's the essential thing. The stock market goes down. Regularly, predictably, sometimes dramatically, and almost every time it goes down, there's a reason that sounds terrifying. A recession, a global event, a political crisis, a banking scare. And almost every time, the people who stayed in the market recovered and went on to build wealth, while the people who panicked and sold locked in their losses and missed the recovery. The goal isn't to never be scared. The goal is to be scared and stay the course anyway, because you understand why the long-term logic still holds, even when the short-term picture looks awful. You need enough knowledge to trust your own strategy when emotions are running high. Not PhD level knowledge. Just enough to say, I understand what I own, I understand why I own it, and I have reasons for my approach that don't depend on what the market did this week. If you haven't done it yet, build that foundation. Read one good book, just one, on the principles of investing. It doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be technical, just enough to give you a framework that holds up under pressure. The slow game looks broken until it isn't. There's something nobody tells you about building wealth slowly and consistently, and I think it might be the most important thing in this entire conversation. For a really, really long time, it doesn't look like it's working. You invest every month. You track your net worth. And for years, the growth feels so slow that it's almost discouraging. The line on the chart barely moves. Your portfolio goes up a bit, The market dips, it goes back up. You're roughly where you were 6 months ago. And some part of you starts to wonder if you're doing something wrong. You're not doing something wrong. This is literally just how compounding works. The early years are almost invisible because the base is small, but the math is quietly doing its thing. And at some point, and this is the part that genuinely feels like magic when it happens, the numbers start to move faster, not because you changed anything, but because the base has grown large enough that percentage gains translate into meaningful absolute dollars. The same 8% annual return that added $800 to a $10,000 portfolio now adds $8,000 to a $100,000 portfolio. The machine picks up speed. But to get to that point, you have to survive the years when it feels like nothing is happening. And this is where most people give up. Not because they made a catastrophic mistake, but because they lost patience with a process that looked broken when actually it was just early. Your job in your 30s is to stay in the game long enough to experience what compounding feels like when it actually kicks in. That's it. That's the whole secret. Stay in the game. What nobody tells you about building wealth. The real thing. Here's something I want to close with, because I think it's the thread running through everything we've talked about today, and it doesn't get said enough. Building wealth in your 30s, real wealth, the kind that gives you options and security and freedom, is not primarily a math problem. The math is actually the easiest part. The hard part is the psychological and emotional work of becoming the kind of person who can make and maintain good financial decisions over a long period of time, through uncertainty, through change, through moments of doubt and fear and temptation and comparison. It's learning to delay gratification, not because you're denying yourself pleasure, but because you understand the value of what you're building. It's developing the self-awareness to recognize when fear or ego or identity is driving a financial decision rather than logic. It's building systems that protect you from your own worst impulses. It's treating your financial life not as a source of shame or stress, but as a craft. Something you develop, something you can get genuinely good at over time. And here's the thing about your 30s specifically. You have something genuinely valuable right now that you may not fully appreciate. Perspective you didn't have at 22, combined with time you won't have at 52. You're old enough to know what actually matters to you. You're young enough that the decisions you make now have decades to compound. That combination is extraordinary. It's actually the sweet spot, even if it doesn't feel that way. The people I've seen build real, meaningful wealth over their lives aren't the ones who found some secret investment, or timed the market perfectly, or had some brilliant insight that nobody else had. They're the ones who made okay decisions consistently for a long time, who stayed patient when patience felt impossible, who kept going when going felt pointless, who were honest with themselves about their patterns and gradually, imperfectly changed them. That's available to you right now. Not after you get the raise, not after you pay off the specific debt, not after the timing gets better. Now, with whatever you're working with. I know it can feel overwhelming. I know the numbers can feel small and the progress can feel invisible, and the whole thing can feel like it's designed for people with more advantages than you have. Some of that is real. Some of it is the story fear tells you to keep you still. The work is figuring out the difference. But here's what I know. After spending way too much time thinking about this stuff, the regret of not starting is almost always bigger than the discomfort of starting imperfectly. Every person I've ever talked to who took their financial life seriously, even late, even messily, even with a lot of past mistakes to untangle, was glad they started when they did. Nobody has ever said, I wish I'd waited longer to start caring about my financial future. So, Open the app, make the transfer, have the conversation, read the book. Take the first step that's available to you this week, not the perfect step, just the one you can actually take. The version of your life you're trying to build is worth the work, and you're more capable of building it than you think.